Yep.
You didn't make it in, huh?
Left on the platform.
Should have seen coming home.
We were gonna go in late, and I'm like, you know what? Let's not even worry about it, because coming home's gonna be...
He ended up taking the Kingston train to Whitman, and then taking a lift from the Whitman T station to Bridgewater T station.
Wow. My water. .34. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We are jumping right into approval of the previous minutes.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. We have a roll call vote for approval.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Some of you may have noticed that Mrs. Loesch is not here, so she is taking, she's present via phone, modern communications, the speakerphone centered directly in front of us, so she can't hear us and have her voice heard for all the votes that we have today will be roll call for that purpose. So, no announcements from the president today.
You want to remind everyone we're being taped?
We are being taped. We're live and being taped for everybody to take reference to that. Thank you, Mr. Fitzgibbons. We have no proclamations today. So that moves us to D, Citizens Open Forum. If there's any citizens that would like to get up and speak, state your name and address. Seeing none, moving on to appointments. No appointments. Moving to, oh, sorry.
We don't have an appointment?
We do. Moving right by it. This is a reappointment.
So I would make a motion to reappoint Mr. Dutton as town manager.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to reappoint Michael Dutton as town manager.
I believe we'll cover the contract ratification later in this meeting. So it's just, at this point, we come up with it, or do we want to postpone it till after we ratify the contract? Should I ask the town attorney on that one, on the sequence?
If he was there, I would say that would be a good idea.
Well, I can't ask the town manager, he's an interested party. All right, then I make a motion, I withdraw my motion if Bill withdraws his second. Sure. We'll wait till the contract ratification and then do the appointment after, if folks are okay. Does that seem like the right sequence?
That does seem like the right sequence.
Seemed like the right sequence.
Okay.
Yes.
And is there official parliamentary procedure for saying something and seconding something to?
I'll make a motion to postpone item E until after item L.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. We have a roll call vote for that motion.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Thank you, everyone. Moving on to hearings, there are none. License transactions, there are 0, and over to H for presentations. Public safety, buildings. Next step, Mr. Town Manager, take it away.
All right, thank you. Let me just set this up so you can see it in a slide format.
Just click on the lower right. And there you go.
That's not what I want. All right. Oh, come on.
Hit escape.
Thank you. Come on. Well, this is interesting.
From the beginning. Don't you want the far left one? Next one. Yes.
All right, we're going to do that. Sorry about this. going to be a much longer presentation than I thought.
Do you need tech support, AKA the District 6 counselor, to help?
I think I do.
Try the space bar.
All right, well, I'm very sorry. Comes up fine for you. Comes up odd for me. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about tonight is basically give you an update on our public safety buildings and their current condition. Included are the police station, the 2 fire stations, and the roadways department barn, also known as the highway barn. We're going to talk very briefly about the projected life expectancy of the current buildings, the anticipated upgrades, additions, and/or replacements of these buildings, and then proposed next steps. So then we'll end up, obviously, any questions, either save them for the end or feel free to interrupt me as we go forward. So the current status of the fire buildings. We have a fire headquarters and station located, as you know, on School Street. The parts of that building date back to 1858. There have been 4 additions over the years, the latest work being done in early 1990s. Obviously, the building was built, the core of the building was built at a time when fire vehicles were much smaller, either pulled by hand or by horse. And then in the late 19-teens, we actually got vehicles which replaced some of the fire equipment that was hand or horse pulled. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, we had just a handful of calls each year. The calls were obviously all fire related. Most were chimney fires. Many were a small handful each year were fully involved factory fires. So most of the factories in Bridgewater at some point had a fire that caused them to burn to the ground. So just as an interesting fact, the up until the late 1800s, the fire department was not a town department. It was a privately run fire response team, and it only responded to the calls in the center of town. So you paid a subscription if you lived in the center of town, or if you had a house in the center of town or a business, and that subscription basically allowed you the services of the fire department. So Fire Station 2, built in the year 2000, roughly. It was designed to provide coverage on the east side of the train tracks. It is right now the only station which can house our ladder truck, which is primarily used to service the BSU campus. Now we've got multiple story buildings out on the west side of town, as you know, the apartments, the Axis, and the other apartments on the Claremont property. Year 2000, we had about 3,000 calls, combined fire and emergency medical calls. Today, the department has close to 6,000 calls in 2018. So in the space of about 18 years, we've doubled the number of calls. And there are a variety of reasons for that. Some unfortunate, well, all unfortunate, but a lot related to mental health issues, overdose, alcoholism, and so forth. And I just made note that currently, you'll see a picture here in a second, but currently fire trucks and ambulances have a very tight fit in the building, which was originally built for horse-drawn equipment and hand-pulled equipment. So let me give you an idea of the fire department headquarters, Station 1, just in a succession of pictures. The building has, as I said, been built in sort of 5 different phases. They're connected not as one, so that there are constant leaks in the building. In 2015, we did do a lot of work over there on the roof so that the roof is tight. However, we do still have incidents of leaks where the buildings come together, the two different vintage buildings come together. The station does have tight working quarters. Places for folks to work are sort of crammed into every nook and cranny over there. And as we all know, we've got far more firefighters today than we did in the early 1900s. We have more than we had in 2000. So sleeping quarters, again, also tight, not terribly appropriate for the mix of firefighters that we now have, but it is what it is. And I will sort of step back for a minute and tell you that, I'm quite proud of the department we have. We rarely have any complaints on the conditions of the building, despite the fact that everybody knows that it's in relatively poor condition. The group that we have is quite dedicated to the cause, and I don't think anybody in that building wants to be a complainer necessarily. So a lot of this are items that you may not know about. Some you may. So, but you generally don't hear the complaints from the department. Very tight storage areas, definitely inadequate for fire and medical supplies in what is now a very modern and cutting-edge department on some levels. The building itself, although this picture is not a great one, but the building itself, as you can imagine, is structurally insufficient for modern loads and all the required equipment storage. The department has over the course of several years tried to sort of sister things up so that the building will continue to at least provide the necessary storage for the demands that they have. Again, this another picture up above the first level roof, and again, probably insufficient structurally. Due to some of the building methods and some of the combinations of the buildings, the way that they were sort of spliced together, there's a lot of issues like this. This is an I-beam vertical support column that is, as you can see, rusted out at its base, and that's probably a result of age and the construction techniques. So the building itself, as I said, was designed for much smaller equipment. So the spaces are tight, definitely quite confined for the fire apparatus that's there now.
And then, just to be clear, Mr. Dutton, that's the front of or the side of a fire engine next to a door?
That is the rear of one of the engines and the overhead door that allows it to back out.
And it looks the same on the other side, probably too.
Correct. Okay. So the front and the back, when the engine comes back, there's a protocol in place, and you'll see firefighters, not the driver, but you'll see firefighters get out of the engine in order for it to be backed in without damaging any of the doors and without backing in too much. So it's sort of inches to spare. So every available inch of space in that department is used. So the facade, which was probably the early 90s, I obviously wasn't here, but for those that remember, that's probably early 90s addition to the department. But the facade looks relatively modern, but it's actually just covering up, a lot of older building, which in and of itself is not bad, but it is in this case, the exterior sort of belies the older age of the the underside, so to speak. So that's Fire Station 1. Fire Station 2 is, as you know, in much better shape. It's much newer than the fire headquarters and Station 1. The major issues at Station 2 really revolve around updating and getting the utilities and the systems up to speed. But in terms of things like the roof, in terms of the exterior, it's not in bad shape, but mostly the inside systems need some help. So shifting a little bit to the highway department, the roadways department, the barn, over the past couple of years, we've used some Green Communities grant funding and some of our capital stabilization fund to replace some doors. And in this case, you're looking at one of the insulated overhead doors to the barn that had rusted out, and that has been replaced. I'll show you here in a second some others that haven't. Just for those that haven't been visiting the barn, there's a large open space with a number of bays. This is, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 trucks that we use in our sanding and plowing operations. The smaller vehicles are sidewalk plows, which we obviously use on the sidewalks. What happens in the environment, in the very high salt environment down at the highway department is that the doors, mostly it's the doors, but also some of the skin of the building, the rust will appear and accelerate pretty quickly. There's not a whole lot you can really do about that. It's just the nature of the environment, the work environment down there, and what we ask the building to do for us. So there's another example. We did replace a number of exterior doors, regular sized doors, along with the overhead door. And again, some of that was paid for by Green Communities, some was paid for through some of the appropriations you made out of capital stabilization. The police station. Police station is probably our newest building, 17 years old, and is in fairly good shape. It's been well cared for over the years, but there are some issues that are creeping up. There are storage constraints, and some of those may be ameliorated by some digital storage, but in police work, they're still in the paper age, so to speak. So there's some storage constraints in that regard.
So there's some of the paper storage that is mandated by Mass General Law or something like that, you have to hold this record for X number of years, et cetera.
Correct. There's certain record retention requirements. And if we, on the town side, there's a lot of record retention that we can do electronically or digitally. With police, not quite so much yet. We've done a lot of changing out and switching around of some of the electronic systems down there. The enhanced 911, as the chief mentioned when he was last here, has been installed and implemented. We have removed from the station the Comcast hub, which was housed there in their electronics room. So that's actually freed up some space, but some of the enhanced 911 equipment, which is placed and installed by the state, has chewed up some of that free space. And the data storage demands and the changes in technology are going to drive some of the demands down there for the foreseeable future. But again, similar to Fire Station 2, we've got some systems That one is not 25 years old, but it's 17 years old. And when you get past 15 years, you're really operating somewhat on borrowed time. This, in particular, these systems went through at least 10 years of a lot of stress, because in that building, we now know that there were heating and cooling elements going on at the same time, and overlapping each other, or working against each other to some extent. And that was because, as a cost-saving measure way back when, we had cut the service contract with the contractor, or the vendor that was providing the HVAC service. So for a number of years, until it was fixed relatively recently, air conditioning could be battling the heating system and causing the energy expense to skyrocket. So that's a little bit more under control, but those systems have been stressed, to say the least.
Mr. Dunn, a quick question. So you have on there 25-year system at the end of their life expectancy. So the building's 17 years old?
Yeah, I made an error there.
Okay.
Those are 17-year-old
So it's 17 years old on a
Yeah.
25-year-old system?
No,
that-
ignore the 25.
Okay.
It should be, I should have written 17-year-old systems in that building.
Okay.
Although the hot water heater was replaced about a year and a half ago.
Okay,
So
thank you.
That's it's right. Oh, you can't see mine. Well, it's sort of in the background there. It's the newer looking piece. One of the challenges that the department faces is storage. Again, police department is not dissimilar to the fire department in the number of calls. Their work has meant that there's more to store. What you see here are bicycles that the department has begun to use on a more routine basis. Certainly on special event days, you'll see officers on bikes, but which is a great thing, but there are storage pressures there. So one of the ways that to relieve some of that storage pressure was the shed that was placed out in the back. There are 2 or 3 sheds actually back there. Ultimately, the chief would like to get rid of those sheds and actually build a proper storage facility. But for the time being, some of that storage is occurring in these sheds. The one on the left is experiencing some rotten floors and so forth, but those can be fixed. And is along the same lines of storage, having the ability to put some of our rolling equipment inside in a secure environment is also important as well. So that's very basically the condition of the buildings. So we have looked at the sort of the life expectancy of these buildings. Obviously, I don't think it takes a brain surgeon to know that the fire headquarters and Station 1 have come, that building is at the end of its, far end of its life expectancy. When we talk about life expectancy, generally, very generally, it means that the usable length, the usable time period for a building, and that can vary, but when we talk about it internally, we generally are looking at the building for the length of the bond that was used to finance its construction, and then maybe a few more years. That's how Massachusetts law looks at the life expectancy of buildings. So, as I say, obviously, and certainly in the case of Station 2 and the police station, which have been fairly well cared for, life expectancy in terms of the condition of the building will probably far exceed the bond that is required to pay for them. But the pressures on modern day uses of those buildings is really what's going to drive some of the needed repairs or expansions. So Fire Station 2, we are coming to the end of that construction bond in 2020. And again, it's due for some upgrades, which we think will extend that useful life for another 15, 20 years. Police station, again, that's also coming to the end of its construction bond in 2020. And as I mentioned, the building's been very well cared for, but it is due for some major HVAC systems upgrades, which are on the capital plan, and will be able to extend the usable life of that building 15 to 20 more years. The roadways barn, slightly different story, but it is as well as coming to the end of its construction bond in 2020. And that building probably needs some more major upgrades, including a new skin, or at least selective replacement of the exterior skin, some HVAC work, probably roof work, and additional door replacements. And I think with some of those efforts, we can certainly extend the life of that building 10 to 15 to 20 years. So,
Mr. Dutton, let's ignore the fire headquarters and station, because that was built before our grandfathers' grandfathers were alive, I think. But all of these other ones, I see construction bond ending in 2020. Let's talk about what life expectancy means. Is it that we should blow up Fire Station 2, the police station, and the roadways barn in an ideal world? I'm not talking about what we can afford. I'm saying in an ideal world, should we blow it up and build all new ones?
That's actually a great question, and that probably some of that will be answered in some feasibility work that we're planning on doing this summer. Fire Station 2, as I mentioned, and I think the chief would concur, is a perfectly usable building. It needs some upgrades, but there's nothing in terms of fire, and in terms of fire and medical work that they do, there's nothing in there that is a detriment.
But you have in your mind a definition of life expectancy, do you not? Mm-hmm. And is that in an ideal world, not in what we can afford world, is that blowing up and building a new building at the end of every bond? No, I don't think that's certainly appropriate. And even if you take the cost out of the picture, in terms of certainly Fire Station 2, we've got a perfectly good building. If we need to add on to it and create more space for the additional storage we need, then that's fine. The police station, really some of the same issues there. It's given its condition and how it's been cared for, we can extend the life significantly by making improvements there without having to do something more and so
drastic.
let me just bring this back around to the point I want to make. My parents essentially lived in the same house on Nolan Park for 40 years. They did a bunch of stuff interiorly to it, but it never changed on the outside, really very much at all. They added a deck, or they added a bigger deck that wasn't there when they bought the house, and they sold it to a perfectly willing buyer who had very little to do when she moved in for, maintaining it or whatnot. So, and in fact, they had a mortgage of 30 years, not 20 years. So it makes me just question a life expectancy of 20 years on any of these municipal buildings. I understand maintenance and whatnot, but if I'm going to have to pay for a bond and then repay it again as soon as the new one's done, that to me doesn't scream capital. That screams administrative cost. And it needs to be built in, just like the assessors do to their 3-year reval, and put inside and segregate funds so that at the end of 20 years, you have a whole pot of money that then you can build the new building with, and you don't have to go out and ask people to pay interest on that. So this whole thing doesn't make sense to me right now. So I just want to say that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I do think that it's confusing. The term life expectancy is generally in the bonding world is when you bond, for instance, a road, you can bond that up to 10 or 15 years. I can't remember which, but that's because you can't go beyond that because the life expectancy of that road.
Well, that's a statutory limit. It's not You know, I can tell you that, you know, the life expectancy of a person born today in the United States is, you know, 74.3 years old. But it doesn't mean I'm going to kill everyone who's 75. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense to say you have to build a new building after every bond is done. It makes no sense at all, in fact. And if it's that way, it should be an operational, not a capital expense. That's just my opinion. I don't need another answer. Thank you.
No, and I don't want to lead people to think that I'm proposing, you know, tearing all these things down, you know, as soon as 2020 comes and rebuilding. It's actually quite the opposite. I think we've got good buildings that you know, will need some additional space, you know, as we move forward.
Mike, question. I kind of agree that I remember, it seems like it was just yesterday, you know, being out there with a lot of other people supporting the debt exclusion for the police, fire, and highway barn back in 1999. It seems to me that, you know, we should get obviously more than 20 years out of a building. I understand that there's some internal things that need to be upgraded, as would have to be done in any building or home. Do you think, forget the main fire station for the moment, because I think we all agree to some extent, it's been talked about, that needs to be totally replaced. Could what needs to be done from what you see at this level on Station 2, the police station, and the highway barn be done within the capital budget? Do you think it's more than that? Like, would we need to add to a debt exclusion for what needs to be done with those three buildings, or could that be built into the capital budget and each year take care of some of those issues?
I think. Well, I'll get to the main answer there, but I think the short answer is, yeah, the things that we need to do on some of those buildings absolutely can be taken care of through the capital budget. Absolutely. But I'll come back around to that question because it's a good one. So in terms of new fire facility, and I think as Councilor Gallagher points out, you know, I think everybody knows that we have to do something with Fire Station 1 or the fire headquarters. So why do we need to do something with that? I mean, obviously it's not in good shape. It's inadequate for the use that it needs to, you know, the function that it needs to provide the town. But there are other underlying issues as well. So as I've mentioned to the council before, in 2018, last year, we had opportunity zone designation granted by the U.S. Treasury Department on the census tract that right on where the fire station sits. So the fire use of that particular piece of property for a fire, response services, fire and medical, really is not the highest and best use there. So there are better development opportunities on that location, which have a long-term benefit to the town, far more than sort of rebuilding a fire station on that site. So that's one reason. Secondly, and probably far more important, is the studies and the discussions we have as far back as 2010 have pointed out that, you know, emergency responses to many parts of Bridgewater are delayed because of where that fire station is located. So we need to get the equipment closer to where the calls are coming from.
And will that impact homeowners' property insurance rates?
So if we can get a station closer to where it's needed, it will have a positive effect on homeowners.
So right now, having it where it is as opposed to a better spot is having a negative impact.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. Federal and state medical regulations drive a lot of the space needs, certainly for the ambulance service. And I don't think it's any news to anybody that we've had a significant amount of development on the west side of town that we're going to have to address.
So can I ask a question on that slide?
Sure.
I'm somewhat confused. Not to say that it's hard to do. So for the first bullet, you've got opportunity zone designated granted by the U.S. Treasury Department for property on which the central fire station sits now. So your statement is saying that zoning is not optimum for a fire station, correct?
The fire station is using up property that could be otherwise used by the private sector to redevelop, and there's a big incentive for the private sector to redevelop in an opportunity zone.
Okay. So, and then we have talked about potentially having a fire station on the west side of town. So what that slide's telling me is eventually we're going to see a brand-new fire station downtown in a different spot as well as a brand-new fire station on the west side?
Not necessarily. I mean, we could have, everybody's jumping ahead.
Well, I mean,
I can get to.
I look at this slide, and I'm looking at it saying we do have needs, but I've never really looked at the downtown zoning as an issue. The existing fire station, as we've all agreed, we need to do something with it. But I guess that first bullet point is now telling me that where it is today isn't where it should be tomorrow.
So I don't want to confuse people. Zone is probably an unfortunate term, but it really has nothing to do with the zoning per se. The opportunity zone is created, essentially created by the federal government as an area where
Right.
private investment is needed and wanted.
So I guess this is the first time I've ever seen, and I understand the zone is big, but this is the first time I've ever seen this put into kind of the same discussion as fire facilities.
So, and the reason is, there's really no relation there. The reason is that that there's a far better use for that piece of property than a fire station. That's really the bottom line.
Which I understand, but the fire station's there.
It is,
So,
but I'm arguing that they're not arguing, but I'm saying that there's an incentive for the town to get it out of that particular opportunity zone.
so the incentive would be to build another fire station. Hopefully, that current fire station is developed into something that hopefully the town will benefit from. So I guess that first bullet point really concerns me because there's a lot of hopes. And where I come, hope is not a strategy. So I appreciate that, but I would also be very concerned if we're looking at basically two brand-new fire facilities. That's my concern.
I think that the thinking was that building doesn't work. We need to replace it. And it makes more sense to put it a little farther to the west side of town to serve that part of town. And that vacating that land offers an opportunity to get some good development there, because anyone who invests money there can avoid capital gains by investing in that census tract. So that's not the driver. That's just, in a way subsidizes the construction of indirectly of a new building somewhere, right?
True. I mean, that's a much better way to put it.
So then, and I'm just trying to understand, if we build on the west side, do we have a fire station in downtown Bridgewater if we're trying to develop the opportunity zone?
Not necessarily. You may not need any fire presence in the downtown area if you've got adequate coverage on the east and west sides of town. So, yeah.
Okay. I would have to say that if I were a business owner or a resident in that center of town with everything that we see down there, I would have some pretty major concerns about that.
If I lived at Axis, I'd have major concerns about not having access to EMS.
Okay, we have that, but Access came well after we've had this. We've had a fire station since the 1800s. What I'm saying is a presence in downtown Bridgewater moving to the west could cause more problems than it solves.
Mr. President, if I may for 1 second. So we talked about the opportunities, and I agree with you. It's probably not really critical to this slide or the discussion itself. I think it was just an informational thing more than an incentive. But one of the points that I was interested in is the old fire station here in the center of town cannot house the ladder truck. So the ladder truck is down by us in Station 2, and it's a 4-mile run out to Axis. So the town's really underserved right now, even with a central fire station, because the central fire station, for the most part, has ambulance runs and there's an engine in there and whatever else is there, but really underserved even in the center right now, even though it is in the center.
Right, but that's because of the building constraints.
Right.
I guess where a lot of people, including myself, were originally looking at this is to take the original space and obviously take that building maybe down to the foundation, but build something there that could house the needs for today. What I'm kind of seeing here is technically pulling out of downtown and building out to the west. So you have west and east, but you don't have a presence in the center of town. I'm putting it up as a concern, not, for me looking at it that way. I know what you're saying, Bill, that, that fire station needs to go. I get that, but I think this is the first time I've seen something where we're looking at an east and west, but nothing in the center of Bridgewater. I'd have a concern with that. No, it's fair.
I did hear the word feasibility mentioned at one point.
It's coming up.
Okay.
Again, where would a fire station be located? As we've just discussed, probably more on the west side of town. We want to be able to improve the response times, both to west and the south side, and we want to be able to provide coverage in the areas where more and more calls are originating. So that's Route 24, the new developments out there, and BSU as well, and be able to shorten the response time. So the feasibility study that we've sort of been dancing around would evaluate all the possible sites throughout town, and that's primarily what they do. They look at all kinds of any areas on the west side of town, any unimproved properties that would be feasible. And there's also the possibility, and we've certainly the chief has talked about this a little bit. It's possible to separate the fire headquarters, the administrative part of the fire department, from the actual station, and provide some type of presence downtown, and also have a presence out on the western side of town. But again, that's the subject of a feasibility study that is coming up. So.
When you say in that third bullet, softball fields, is that the Scotland Street softball fields?
Yes. In theory.
Yeah, just an interesting note. And again, I hate to be the old guy here, at least the old Bridgewater guy. I was helping my parents maybe about 15, 20 years ago now clean up some stuff in their basement. And one thing I found was a 1969 League of Women and Voters pamphlet about know your town and the officials, et cetera, some of the issues involved in the town. And in that pamphlet, they talked about how it was very important to address the west side of town's needs. And by the way, I lived on the west side. I grew up on Nolan Park. Very important to address the west side of town's needs for fire safety. And that's the exact spot that it was going to go and planned to go for in 1969. I'm sure the chief can verify that. But that's how long we've been talking about it, for 50 years. And, the other interesting thing to me at that time was when I looked at the number of registered voters in town in 1969, and this was at that time, not several years later, there were fewer registered voters in town in 1969 than there are kids that go to our schools in Bridgewater in 2009 or 2019. So, it just gives you a sense of scale.
It's also interesting to note that the town actually had 3 fire stations back in the 1920s. I can't remember, obviously one was the one over on School Street, but then there were 2 others located more outside of town. So what a feasibility study will do is take all kinds of call data and all kinds of information and condense it down and identify general areas where it would be most appropriate. But this is kind of what you see here on the left is our current situation with the Fire Station 2 out on Plymouth Street and then the School Street location. And then it leaves, obviously, coverage gaps way out on the south side of town. So if just trying to move a station further out to the west, you've got better coverage out, obviously, on the west side and towards some more of the population centers. And then you keep coverage on the east side of town at the Plymouth Street station. So next steps, this summer, you'll be looking at a feasibility fund, money to fund a feasibility study for a new fire station or enhanced fire services. Once those funds are approved, we would go in contract with a selected consultant to do the feasibility study, and that would include their results would include the space requirements for the department's programs based upon a lot of discussion with fire department staff, all public safety staff, really. A review of the current state national standards for emergency response times. As I say, they'll look at call data and the volumes and where those calls come from and the acuity of those calls. They'll look at space requirements for paramedic services. And then they'll give us identification of up to 3 realistic sites, conceptual design, and preliminary cost estimates. So that's coming up for you probably very early in the summer to look at as part of the second, third round of capital funding. And so that's coming your way. On some of the other issues, we've got $20,000 that's on your current capital order for the creation of a town building maintenance and improvement plan. It's been honestly a long time coming. But that will look at the regular maintenance needs of each of our major town buildings, any replacement schedules for capital items such as roofs, furnaces, exterior painting, and so forth. Review all compliance with federal, state, and local accessibility requirements, and then review space needs for the DPW and police department to really figure out what kind of additional space is going to be required in those buildings.
Just a comment, and you don't need to answer, just take it under advisement as you do this. Regular maintenance needs of each major town building. That sounds, again, like an operational, not a capital cost to me. And it may be a one-time extraordinary thing, but this needs to get in the administrative, the operational budget of the town over the long term. Otherwise, we're just doing a disservice. Anytime you're putting off regular expenses that you know you can expect year after year to fund a different administrative expense, all you're doing is setting yourself up for failure. That's all you're doing. And, thank goodness we've been fiscally prudent and have some money to put toward that, but we have to be even more so to get that into the regular operational budget and not spend it on other things operational. I can understand replacing capital, just like I suggested with the assessors. You put in a line item every year and you reserve it year after year, and you're able to say, okay, now I have enough to, fix a furnace or a water system or whatever you need to do. But that top bullet just goes through me sideways.
Well, it's not expending. I mean, this gives us a plan upon which we can then decide whether we're going to fund through operation, which obviously that first bullet would, or fund through a capital improvement plan.
Okay, thank you. But it should go through operations, period.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Peter.
And that, I perfectly understand Mr. Fitzgibbon's point about maintenance. I mean, unless you have it budgeted somewhere, it doesn't happen. And you can see where that's gotten us, with, a Mitchell School, perhaps. And with the police station, too, I guess we signed on to an HVAC system, which was high performance, but required an annual contract because it was so sophisticated, right? And we decided to bag that sophisticated management of this sophisticated hardware and ended up spending a whole lot more money. So we really need to be cognizant of those operating costs and how we're going to meet them. I was just walking by the town hall, which we spent a decent amount of money kind of closing into the weather. We, new windows and made that envelope of that building weather tight. But it's been, I don't know how many years, 7 years, and a little bit of caulk around some joints in the bottom of that building would preserve the life of that mahogany base to those columns and things like that. And so I think it's, this sort of thing is really the critical first step to kind of charting out realistic needs, and with the hope that you don't neglect them and cost yourself more money down the road. So this is a great first step.
So that is what is coming up in front of you, just to begin some planning processes. Obviously, everybody wants to know, okay, well, how much is all this going to cost? And it's, I only put this up there to give you very rough estimates, which are subject to wild swings at this point. We are carrying in our capital plan a $10 million price tag for Fire Station 1, and we're carrying about $100,000 right now for the design work on Fire Station 2. In a I won't say worst case. If we were looking to make significant space additions to Fire Station 2, we're probably looking in the area of very roughly $1.5 million. Police station, as I mentioned, relatively minimal expense. It's currently on the capital plan. Some of the HVAC is on the capital plan for about $50,000. That would not address the additional space needs. So we'll be looking at that more as we go along. And the highway barn, again, most of what we are carrying in the capital plan will take care of what the problems we have now, which include some of the roof and rusted out skin and windows and doors. And that's a $700,000 price tag. If we have a need to add on, it'll probably add another $300,000. But again, very, very, very rough estimates, but I know everybody wants to have some sense of whether it's going to cost $100,000 or, $100 million. So it's trying to give you some hopefully realistic but very rough estimates at this point.
Did you know the city of Las Vegas shares a fire station with a college, state college?
I did know that, actually, and there are several models to that end. And when we get into the feasibility phase, that's certainly something that we want a consultant to look very carefully at.
Also with that 10% with the state for housing. So combined housing and fire stations as well. Retail space as well as commercial.
Did not know that part.
Yep. Just learned that through the iPhone.
But you bring up a very good point. We've had an on and off again relationship with BSU ever since the beginning of time, I think. But there are certain benefits that accrue trying to do things with the university, and certainly we've been very forthcoming with the university, and for the most part, they've been very forthcoming with us on their planning efforts. And we should continue to have a more formal discussion about any possibilities of doing things jointly. So.
Mrs. Loesch, are you still with us?
Councillor Loesch.
Aisha Loesch.
Yes, I am. Sorry, I had to unmute my phone and it was locked.
Okay.
I'm here.
So there were a bunch of slides you didn't see. I hope you heard all of us talking. There's a moment for questions now. Not sure if you had any. Wanted to make sure, one, you were there, and two, did you have any questions?
One, I'm here, and two, I don't have any questions. I was following the deck that Michael had sent over earlier in the evening, but if anything comes up, I will follow up with him directly. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Very good. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
And since we're on Michael's, hey, town manager report's next.
I've got almost as lengthy a town manager's report. Okay. Let me just set this back up. There we go. All right. I have not too many items this evening, but I will report the Comprehensive Plan Committee has begun its heavy lifting work, and the committee members have each taken responsibility for almost 10 to 12 separate components of the plan, and they've begun to organize some community meetings to solicit some resident opinions on a whole host of issues relative to the different chapters, if you will, of the master plan. So obviously these sessions help inform the final report, but between now and the final report, you'll see a lot of public outreach, and we're planning on going to the public, so we'll be having we'll do a lot of effort to get in front of, Autumn Fest, various, parades, Memorial Day, 4th of July, and really try to get some opinions from folks about what their town should look like. McElwain School residences, which is what the project is called at this point, did receive its site eligibility letter from the Mass Department of Housing and Community Development. That allows the comprehensive permit application to move forward with the public hearing in front of the ZBA. So that is coming up in a week or two. As people that have visited and come to this meeting can tell, the Academy building experienced a burst sprinkler pipe, and in the vestibule area, as I tell people, it looks worse than it actually was. We were very lucky. We had a malfunction in the electric heater that heats that area between the front door and the sliding doors. And we believe it caused the pipe to freeze, and then when it thawed, it actually had burst and leaked out some of the water that was in the sprinkler pipe. So that's been all cleaned up. We've had testing done. No additional moisture in the walls, and we'll get that patched back up and fixed as soon as the new heater comes in. Mitchell School Building Committee, as you probably know by now, has voted to submit the new school proposal, one of the two new school proposals, to the MSBA as its preferred schematic option. The MSBA will vote to either approve or not approve that at their April meeting. So there's a little bit of a breather between now and that point. The vote for the new option came after a fairly exhaustive review of the different options, including simple repair, a repair renovation, addition renovation, and obviously a tear down and new school. So the committee's work for now is on this piece. The heavy lifting is done. Obviously there'll be much heavier lifting coming down the road. The town, our consultants completed the townwide lighting assessment, street lighting assessment, which preps us for a purchase of the street lights and a conversion to LED technology. The expectation is that the 2019's Green Community grant application or the grant, and then the MAPC grant, which we just made application to, will cover the cost, either all the cost or most of the cost of the full conversion, which should be completed by December of this year. Claremont, just giving you an update on Claremont Company. As you know, the second phase of its apartment development has been approved. 40B has been approved by the ZBA some months ago. They are continuing to do some more additional planning for their properties. It all looks quite good from our perspective, but that's currently being reviewed through the MIPA process. And even though that build-out is only conceptual, it actually does help us quite a bit in recruitment, business recruitment in that area out in the 104 Route 24 corridor. As you can probably see, they've almost completed their second office building out there, and that is almost complete. They're working on some of the interior stuff. They're also tormented by the lack of, or at least the delay in getting natural gas service to their building due to some of the issues that happened up north of Boston this fall. So the pickleball, in case counselors are being asked about pickleball and what's going on and why it's not built yet, that initiative at the senior center continues to be in a little bit of a holding pattern. The original proposal was to build 4 pickleball courts in that sort of gravel area across Wally Kruger Way from the senior center. That is actually part of the Mitchell School property. The property was subdivided back when the senior center was built, and then the Conant Center. So the town owns, town owns all of it, but they're 2 separate parcels. One contains the senior center and the Conant Center, and then the Mitchell School owns essentially where that gravel parking lot is back over to South Street. So we're trying to encourage the architects to give us some sense on when we'll be able to spot the pickleball courts. We don't want to do that until the school is completely designed. We certainly don't want to be putting something down and then having to tear it up to accommodate another construction project. Just a little update on Mr. Pascal's Broad Street property. We've had several sessions with him, very good sessions, and he's looking to be able to submit something in front of the planning board, site plan review. We were understanding this month we have not received any site plan, official, formal engineered site plans at this point. So we can't finalize any kind of agreement with him until we see that. But the good news is, at least during our discussions, we seem to be all on the same page in terms of what the town would like to see out of that development, and obviously what we know he would like to see out of that development. Progress continues on Elm Street. We filed both the state and local environmental notifications. The final engineered plans for Elm Street are actually should be finalized by the end of this month, and as soon as those are complete, we'll be looking to get that project out to bid as quickly as possible. And again, for people that don't know, we've received $3 million in state funding, which will offset a total project cost of probably about $6 to $6.5 million there. And related, the DeBartolo Company, the developer proposing a 350 to 400 square foot facility up on Elm Street, has been working very closely with us, which is good. And they secured their site plan approval from the planning board last month. And they are also in front of the Concom looking to get approval. They had one good session. They're looking to get approval at the mid-February meeting. They'd like to begin construction in March and then wrap that up in December, which for a building that size is very impressive, but they've got very impressive building team together, so I don't doubt that they can do that. So, and my my monthly push for anybody interested in boards and committees. I'm happy to discuss openings with anybody that is interested. Just reach out. Obviously, I ask people to reach out to counselors, so if they come through you, certainly push them my way. I'm happy to talk about the great things that committee members do and the fun that they have. So that is what I have.
Thank you, Mr. Dutton. Any questions for the town manager? Mr. George.
Thank you. Mr. Dutton, so you mentioned about the Mitchell School Building Committee. There's a lot more work to be done down the road. Could you go over, though, when we bring it to the voters, what the funding mechanism is going to be specifically, so that people understand exactly what it is and, more importantly, what it isn't?
Excellent question. Any big project like that that requires a long-term bond in order to fund would be presented to the voters as what's referred to as a debt exclusion. Commonly, people refer to things as overrides. An override is a permanent increase in your taxes to fund whatever the override is purporting to fund. But that's a permanent increase. A debt exclusion is a temporary increase in your taxes for the life of the bond in order to pay off a particular project, in this case, the school. At the end of that, your tax obligation would drop by the amount that you've been paying specific to pay for that bond. Question.
Thank you.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. A couple questions. Speaking of highway barns, the old highway storage barn on Elm on Spring Street, do you have an update on that? Because I think that the past several months, going down Spring Street, particularly on Saturdays, you have four businesses within a very small distance, and they're doing very well. And there's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of activity down there, and I'm sure they could use some more parking. So can you tell me the status of the highway barn that I want torn down and made parking?
I think universally, most people want it torn down. We've completed, I think I've mentioned this before, we've completed the building assessment. We know there's asbestos in the building that has to be abated before we can tear it down. That's not a big issue. What we're waiting on now is the ground assessment. Before we tear it down, we want to know whether or not we can touch the ground. And in order to provide parking, we're going to have to touch the ground, and that is a more questionable proposition. So we're waiting on the results of ground testing. They've done borings, and we're just waiting for the results.
So you've had the ground testing, and
Yes.
I mean, this is 3 months ago that was done. How long do those tests take to come back?
3 months?
That's
Longer than 3 months.
That's a good question. A while. We've been working on the other side while we're waiting for that. We know that we've got contractors lined up that are willing to bid on the actual tear down of the building. So we're not trying to use the test results as a delay.
Sure. And the mobile station property, where are we with that?
We haven't had any additional correspondence with the mobile station at this point. It is, as you can see, it is on the market now, and it has been cleaned up. We don't think it's been cleaned up by the owner. We think the owner of the property in back of the mobile station has staged things, materials and equipment on the site. So I think that's the reason that some of the cleanup has happened on site, but the property is for sale at this point. But we know that the owner is very happy to either sell it to us for $1.5 million or lease it to us for $100,000 a year. And that's the last correspondence we've had.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Just to follow up on Mr. George's question earlier, you distinguish between a debt exclusion and an override. But the other thing about a debt exclusion that it's not the same as an override is the debt exclusion must be used for the exclusive purpose that it's voted for, whereas an override, you might think, okay, we're voting this to fund extra police officers, road repairs, whatever, but if it goes into the general fund, it can go wherever this town council votes it to go.
Exactly.
Right? And then the other follow-up to Mr. Jordan's question, because I didn't know if he was going there or not, is just to prepare people. When the town goes forward and asks for a vote, even though there's an expectation of state reimbursement of some amount, I'm not going to mention any numbers, but the form of the vote has to be for the full amount of the project, correct? So just so everyone knows, whatever people might hear, well, this is the projected cost, it's going to be significantly more than that because it will include whatever projected state reimbursements coming in.
Correct. So the total cost of the project is what's put on the ballot, and then you're correct that amount is reduced by whatever state reimbursement we get.
I just want to prepare people. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Wood.
Thank you. 3 subjects tonight. I was asked over the weekend about First Street, which is off of Elm. Thank you. So I know, I don't remember the details now. The council voted something about private roads and that sort of thing. Is it the expectation that First Street will get some road treatment at some point, meaning pavement or fixing or something?
Correct. First Street is a private road, as we all know. It made it very difficult for us to try to explain to people that no, the town can't go in there and pave it because it's a private road. We can't do that. So one of the reasons that we secured MassWorks funding was that we included sewer installation as part of our application for the First Street corridor there. So once the sewer, and I think we're just about to award the contract for the sewer installation. So once the sewer installation goes in, which will take probably a couple of months, the owners on First Street will then actually pave. They'll do it through the town and through a bid process, as we have done, but they will be assessed a betterment to cover the cost of the paving. So the cost of the sewer installation, which actually isn't that much, is covered by MassWorks. The cost of the paving will be assessed as a betterment to the property owners along First Street. So the short answer is yes, that will see substantial work over the next few months, and then it will culminate in a paving of the entire length of First Street.
Okay. Second question is about Oak Street. Certainly a large capital project. I don't know if it's on the capital plan right now. Mm-hmm. That wasn't in any of the discussions for the public buildings, but it's certainly a large piece of capital that we would need. Where's that project at this point?
That is on the capital plan to the tune of, I believe, $750,000, if I'm not mistaken. And it appears in, I believe, 2021 as an item for 2021.
Okay. I want to return back to the senior center for a minute. I know Jim Campbell of the rec department, I think he's still on the rec committee, is kind of heading the pickleball court. I always thought that parking lot was an extension of the senior center. I've been down to many events where there's certainly inadequate parking at the senior center for the senior center without using that extended parking. But now I'm hearing it's not part of that property. It's potentially tied to the Mitchell School. So what do we do with parking if that extra parking lot isn't available?
That's a great question, and that's one that I'll certainly pose to the school architects. But that, yes, you're correct that piece of the total property is part of the lot that the Mitchell sits on.
Thank you.
Mr. Souza?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Dunn, still at the senior center. The front entering into the building, there has been some talk about redoing it. And I believe that there is a fund of money that is put aside and is sitting there. And what are we doing about getting that straightened out?
Actually, the senior center, I know the senior center elder services board is looking at a bunch of different relatively small projects down there, and they do have money left in their fund, the old Hunt School Fund. And I believe I'm scheduled to meet with them next week to go over all of the different items they'd like to address, and then package that up as one project.
Yeah, because I know they were talking about that being a concern for security, because you have that one door, and once you're inside that door, you have access to the entire building. Okay?
So, yeah, so on the security end, I have heard that they would like to do something a little more secure, so
A double
I wouldn't
door.
be surprised, yep.
Build it out, put a double door, and they said they know that they have the money available, and someone told me that they've been talking about it for over 2 years. That's only hearsay. It might be 2 months, as far as I know, and so that's why I'm bringing it up this evening.
Well, I appreciate that. I know that they've been talking about a bunch of improvements down there, cabinet replacements, countertop replacements, some flooring, ceiling tiles, and so forth. So I'm sure I'll hear about that next week when I go down, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Dutton, one question has popped up on recently in social media. The water meter project?
Yes.
For the electric water meters, where are we? with
We
that?
are a little over 2/3 of the way complete, and that was as of probably 2 weeks ago, so I'm sure that the contractor's a little better than that. They've been able to, they were having a little problem trying to gain access to a few places, and I guess that's much better as well. So they're racing along, and we are expecting them to be done. I think the last I heard was the end of February. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Dutton. Committee reports. Mr. Wood.
Thank you. Just before this meeting, we had a meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. I think the two items that we talked about cannot be voted tonight, but while it's fresh on my mind, I wanted to talk about our discussion a little bit and tell you one of the actions that'll hopefully take place when we get to vote on this. First of all, on the acceptance of the non-recurring revenue, that was an easy thing to recommend at 200, and I forgot what the final number was. It's not in front of me. But it's the prison mitigation money, basically, and hopefully the Finance Committee doesn't see a problem with accepting that. The second item we talked about was a fixing of the town clerk's salary. Again, we can't vote on it tonight because the FinCom hasn't voted on it. But in our committee, we had a discussion about that, and the number that's on here is $69,900 annual salary. And after the discussion, and I brought some statistics with me, the statistics show that we're not a small town anymore. We're ranked about 70th at the population level, which puts us pretty high in the list. And when you look at the list and you look at the roles and other things, what I suggested, because I made the motion, is that we fund this as a professional position, not a part-time position. And as a professional position, we have a professional sitting in the position right now. And so I made the recommendation, which was supported by the committee, and it can't be voted on again tonight, but I made the recommendation that we bump it up to $75,000, which puts it in the middle of the town clerk's salary range for comparable communities. And that's the committee report. Thank you.
Other committees?
Should I just
Mr. Fisk-
follow up with Mr. Wood on that one?
Absolutely.
Are you going to communicate that to the Finance Committee so they can have that discussion?
Well, I provided notes, minutes back to Ann, so
Okay.
hopefully it gets passed back, yes.
Super.
Any other committees? No. Speaking of the next two items, we'll be not taking any action on the two items, A and B, FY 19-040 to a fixed town clerk salary, and 19-043 for acceptance of non-recurring revenue to capital, as the FinCom has not met. Not sure what the parliamentary process is for moving along.
Postpone it till our next meeting.
No vote
I make
needed.
a motion for that.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. We'll have to do a roll call vote on that as we have a remote participant.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Thank you. Moving on to order FY 19044 for the ballot question, Town of Bridgewater Home Rule Charter changes.
Motion to place on the ballot.
Second.
Motion made and seconded, and discussion. First, Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Mrs. Loesch, if you can hear me, I'd really like to defer to you to speak on this, as you've kind of lived this for the past several years as being on the Charter Review Committee that recommended a bunch of changes and then shepherding it through the whole process as chairman of the Rules and Procedures Committee. I think your insight on this would be very valuable. Maybe someone should cure Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I'm here.
Yes.
You're just looking for my support for this?
Well, I'm looking for your opinions on it, as you've done most of the work around this. Well, not most of the work, but you've been on the Charter Review Committee and you've been on the Rules and Procedures Committee getting it to this point. So I think you have a very unique and valuable perspective.
Sure. So, as Mr. Fitzgibbon mentioned, I had started volunteering on the Charter Review Committee back in 2005, I believe, or 2016. And throughout the process, we've had multiple hearings, we've had multiple meetings amongst the Rules and Procedures Committee, had a lot of speakers come in. We spent time going line by line. At least 4 times, I think, we've gone through it. And now that we have it back from the state, I think we're finally at a place to get this closed. And to Mr. Gallagher's point 2 weeks ago, to start it again very shortly. But I really do think what we've produced was the best of listening to what the town had to say, what residents had to say, what the committee thought was best, and making updates that were best for the town. So that is kind of my viewpoint on the charter and where we stand today.
I'm all set.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chase.
Thank you, Mr. President. And in response to the comments from Mrs. Loesch, I certainly share in offering kudos to her and to the other members of the Charter Review Committee. It does represent a substantial body of work. I recall that 2 weeks ago when we first began to take up the issue once again of the charter amendment, there was some concern about the fact that the form in which the provisions were returned to us from the legislature really removed from us as a council the ability to put forward on the ballot specific individual changes to the charter. It was really leaving us with no option among ourselves as a council to do other than to vote up or down on the whole package. And so too, were we to proceed to presenting this before the voters on the April ballot, that's exactly the choice that the town's voters would have. Simply an up or down vote on acceptance of the charter amendment. And I think that fact really is, it's really quite a disservice to all of the work that was put into this by a great many people. And I think it's really an egregious error. I think that there should be an opportunity for the council and for the voters to act in their own capacity individually on these specific provisions. I'm particularly upset about the fact that, and I say this with some degree of hesitancy, but the fact that the charter amendment would provide for the appointment of a town clerk rather than the elected town clerk position that we're accustomed to. Now, I know that I'm generally familiar with the arguments in favor of an appointed town clerk position when towns do consider that particular option. I think, however, that the overriding concern that I feel is that the degree of accountability that is established by virtue of having an elected town clerk should be an overriding concern and should be something that we take very seriously here. I think that there is tremendous advantage and really quite a few benefits afforded to the town, to all of the town citizens, by virtue of having a town citizen run for election just as we do, secure signatures, get on the ballot, and maintain on a daily basis in the office downstairs, the office of the town clerk, a physical presence. You know, there aren't many, let's put it this way, I think that most people in this town are not going to have an opportunity to address face-to-face the town manager. Certainly, many residents of the town will not have an opportunity or take advantage of it to come and address face-to-face the town council. So too, many of the other boards and agencies of the town. But to me, the office that the citizens have very direct opportunity for face-to-face contact is with the town clerk. For a lot of, some very simple, some maybe not so, but, a lot of very practical needs. Whether it's voter registration, whether it's some other election-related material or question, whether it's, a dog license or a death certificate or, whatever the case may be. That's really what people, I think, need to have, we might say a familiar face, but someone who they know, perhaps they're well acquainted with personally. But I think that degree of accountability is really the single overriding concern to me. And, when we talk about, the advantage of an appointed position over an elected position, yes, it's often put in terms of the professional stature that we would want to attract among candidates for that job. Frankly, I don't think that we are at all deficient in that regard presently in the town clerk position. And I think that our town is of a sizable enough stature that we could attract and will continue to attract professional candidates among the voters to fill the position of an elected town clerk. So I am personally opposed to that. If in fact the motion is made tonight that we proceed to the ballot, I think I can't bring myself to do that. I would have to oppose that. That's just my opinion, and I give full credit to everyone who's put what I know to be a great deal of work into this, but I feel it's that important and should be suitable for further discussion by the council. And that's what I have.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher, and then follow up with Mr. Columbotus.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I could ask, Mike, the last 2 weeks ago, I think we kind of asked you to look into why it came back the way it did, where we can't break it out into questions. Did you ever get a clear, answer from the State House or whoever? No.
Well, no.
Go ahead.
I didn't get a clear answer.
Somewhere along the line, there was a disconnect. There was a disconnect somewhere along the line, because when we had this discussion several months ago, we talked about breaking it up. And I don't know if we would have voted to do that or not, but we talked about whether we wanted to separate and make the town clerk issue a separate question, or even some of the other changes a separate question. We talked about that. And we were basically told, well, let's wait till it comes back. We can separate it when it comes back. And now we're told that we can't. So I don't know if it was just not presented to the State House, in a fashion where they thought that's what we wanted to do, because I really think that if they knew that's what we wanted to do, I think that they would have let us do that. So there was a disconnect, a big disconnect on someone's part. However, I was part of that charter review committee that was established in 2014. A lot of work has been done. There's some good things and a lot of good things in these changes. There are some things that I am not comfortable with. However, I think let's put it before the voters and see what they have to say. So I will probably support this going to the voters. I think we need to do that. But we'll see where it ends up in April.
Mr. Columbotus.
I think Mr. Chase made all the important points incredibly articulately, and I couldn't agree more with everything he said. I think the next, and I feel the same way that I wouldn't be able to support putting this forward. It does seem like a cheapening of the efforts of the Charter Review Committee and this process generally. I think before we vote to put this forward to the voters, we should explore what our other options are at this point. Can we rescind? Can we just scrap this and perhaps send and do this in a series of ballot questions? Maybe draft it as 3 separate ballot questions or 2, or all the other changes in that one change, for example. Is that even viable? I don't know that we have that answer, and I don't see any need to rush ahead with something that is suboptimal when we haven't explored what the alternatives might be. So I would urge, I guess, postponing this, if nothing else.
Mr. Wood.
Thank you. I'm in support of moving forward tonight, and I hope I can address maybe some of Mr. Chase's concerns. Excuse me. The process that was undertaken, the charter review process, which was a different body than the council, I think took years to go through. They went through a lot of different interviews. There was probably in total, to get to the stage we're at now, no less than 30 public meetings held. Probably the number's closer to 50 public meetings. We looked at, once the Charter Review Committee had made their recommendations, and their recommendations weren't made lightly, I believe the committee went through the process and double voted everything that was in the recommendations. The rules and procedures then was handed off the work, and we must have had 10 plus meetings ourselves, in which we invited the public. It's a public meeting. We had a couple presentations. And, the concern about the elected town clerk is a real one. I understand the feelings behind that. But when you look at a town our size, it's no longer a small town. It's a large town. And the statistics I was looking at earlier this night were not just, where we fell in the population. So there's 351 cities and towns. We're number 70 in that list in population. When you look at appointed versus elected, at all the municipalities above us in population, 75% are appointed. When you look at small towns, and I put the cutoff at 15,000 as a population, and years ago that was a pretty sizable town. When you put the cutoff at 15,000 people in the town, just the opposite happens. So there's 220 municipalities in the Commonwealth with 15,000 or less. And the requirements for those communities must be smaller than our community. And out of those communities, it's still about 25% are appointed. The Commonwealth also has a municipal law that says it says selectmen. It may apply to this, but after an elected town clerk has been in office for 5 years, the selectman of that town can make a tenure appointment. So basically making an appointment, and there's a handful of town clerks out there right now. So when we looked at in our meeting structures, we heard the concerns of elected versus appointed. We made a couple of different adjustments. So one of the adjustments was made in the adoption of the town's administrative code. So if you read in the administrative code right now, unless a council changes it, and that would take a vote of 6, it's an ordinance. If right now in the administrative code, the council must appoint someone from the town of Bridgewater residents. There's a residence requirement. So I think that's a little limiting, but it was to answer the concern that, we need someone who knows the town, understands the people, knows the people, and can work with the people, because it is a people-facing office. And, you go in for marriage certificates, dog licenses, marriages sometimes, and other things. So we made that adjustment in the administrative code so that whoever is selected has to live in the town of Bridgewater. Now, the second concern we heard was managerial hierarchy, and whether in some cases the town clerk reports into the town manager because it's seen as an executive function. And the original charter group recognized that as an executive function. If you look at the functions of the office, it's an executive function it's regulatory compliance for the most part, right? Keeping vital records, that sort of thing. I agree, there are some areas where there's flexibility, judging whether a resident actually lives in town of Bridgewater, deciding whether someone is homeless and needs schooling or something like that. Those are subjective items. And it is possible that maybe there would be pressure from the town manager. So to answer those questions, we looked at a couple other municipalities, including Braintree, who has an appointed town clerk, but it's appointed by the council. So the town clerk in those communities like Braintree, and hopefully like Bridgewater, where it's appointed, something would really have to go wrong in the office for the council to find a majority vote to take job action against that person, as opposed to one person making that decision. So we tried to address the concerns that way to handle that. So we made it a Bridgewater resident. We shifted the reporting responsibility into the council structure, where there's 9 instead of just 1. We look at it as a large town, so the function has to be a professional, professional management qualities, not just someone who can get elected because they're friends with a few hundred people. Mrs. Hunt has demonstrated that it's a full-time job. She's there 40 hours a week. She's there sometimes on Saturdays. She sent her staff to training. That's what a manager does. That's what you would expect a manager and a department head to do. So that's why also on this other thing, I said we should treat it as a professional, not a part-time job. I think in some of the small towns, you can do your town clerk stuff in the morning and play golf in the afternoon. We're no longer a small town. I hate to break it to the town, but we're not a small town anymore. So I think we made some adjustments along the way. And the face of whoever's in that office should be someone from Bridgewater. It's a managerial position. It's a regulatory position. And now it's a reporting position, or hopefully will be a reporting position, that you have to have something really go wrong in the office to take job action against that person. Hopefully I answered some of the concerns.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
The first statement I'm going to make is in no way a value judgment. It's just an observation of fact. Every elected town clerk I've ever met in the town of Bridgewater who's opined on whether to have the position be elected or appointed says it should be elected. Take from that what you will. However, every time a committee has recommended something for the town, it's recommended appointed. The Charter Review Committee came out with an appointed town clerk recommendation. The original Charter Town Government Study Review Committee came out with appointed. The Rules and Procedures Committee came out with appointed. And so take from that what you will. But what I'm really concerned about is, Mr. Columbotus and Mr. Chase, your opinions that we should just dash the work of multiple years and multiple people and not trust the voters on this. Mr. Gallagher has it right. If you don't like this ballot question, I urge you, please feel free to vote against it, work against it, call your friends, tell them don't vote for it. That's what I would suggest. But to not give the people of the town a chance on this that multiple people have worked on. When we say we need volunteers and then we squash their work by not wanting to put it on a ballot, that is not a good way to get volunteers. And it's not what I want to see as we move forward with other votes that we may have to put on the ballot this year. And people say, well, I don't like that, so we shouldn't even put it on the ballot. No, that is not the way to do this process. Trust the voters of the town to make the right decision. I believe firmly that they will do that, but don't throw away years and years of volunteer work just because you dislike one provision of the whole thing. Thank you.
Can I call?
Mr.
I have a point of
George.
privilege, do I? Because I was invoked, my name was invoked, is that right? I think,
You mentioned your name, so.
yeah. I don't think it's disrespecting the work of these committees at all. I think to Mr. Chase's point that you're really cheapening the work of this committee by forcing this all or nothing approach. And this has been a process of refinement and debate and discussion. And yes, if there's no other way to do it, I would put it forth in one lump sum, either or, yes or no format. But in the very least, we should explore whether there's an alternative so we can do more honor to all the hard work. And not just, kind of, oh, here it is. Here's what the state's forcing us to do. We better go with it. I think it's important to recognize that it was the assumption of most people that we would be able to break down some of these questions into separate ballot questions. So that's the kind of critical difference. Is that the operating assumption was that we'd be able to do that, and this is really kind of news to everyone that we're not. So until we've explored alternatives, I don't think this should go forward. Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up? Mr. George?
Yeah, so I will be voting to support bringing it to the ballot with extreme disappointment. As was brought up earlier, I'm really disappointed at the fact that, to Mr. Fitzgibbon's point, hundreds of hours of work by volunteers is being put in front of the voters as one question, which we did not expect to happen. I absolutely respect Mr. Columbotus. I think we are at the point, though, where we have to put the voters, who probably a lot of people are expecting this to go to ballot, to bring this to ballot. That being said, I will go on record as saying I do not support the town clerk being appointed. Absolutely not. I also do not support that the town council get a stipend. We can use $27,000 better than town council stipend. And I'm not sitting here saying $3,000, I couldn't use it. I just don't like the fact that we are buckling our financial belt and we're going to allocate $27,000 for a town council stipend. I've always enjoyed the fact that this is a pure volunteer job. And granted, a lot of us take money out of our own pockets, and I understand that. But if someone were not to run for council because they wouldn't get paid a $3,000 stipend, then they shouldn't run for town council at all. So, Ms. Loesch and everyone who worked on this, I support it going to ballot. I apologize ahead of time, but I will not be supporting this on the vote. Thank you.
I don't know if Ms. Loesch has any other comments at this point.
I don't. I heard a lot of the things. Oh, I guess I do because I'm talking, huh? I hear a lot of things that we've discussed in the past, and I think they're valid to just bring up one more time before we go for a vote. Unfortunately, things did not come back from the state in the way folks thought, and we'll have to go to the town with a yes or no vote. I think it's our job to ensure the town is educated on what is in the full charter, not kind of like the highlights or the hot topics, which are definitely interesting, but every section that has been changed, all the different things that would be affecting the town, the things that are going to be beneficial from a financial perspective, which I just heard was an important thing. And to be clear, selectmen were paid prior to the downfalls of the early or whatever you want to call it, 2000s. And the stipend wouldn't take place for another 3 years until that we had the money to show for it. And most of us most likely won't be on the council at that time. We should really look at the full entire charter, and from now until April, spend that time educating and making sure people have a full understanding of what they're voting on, instead of kind of just looking at one or two issues out of the whole document.
Thank you. I'd personally like to echo that and many things that Mr. Fitzgibbons said. It is unfortunate that we did not get somewhat of a menu perspective to go paragraph by paragraph. I know we can educate our voting population. Maybe one doesn't deserve any more attention than the other, or any more focus, although I know there's hot buttons, as Mrs. Loesch said. It's kind of like maybe the big bills, hundreds of pages of bills, and people say vote yes or no based on a single paragraph, something that took years to build. We have something on a large scale with a lot of detail in it, and I think the folks that vote for us are smart enough to vote for us, and I think they'll be smart enough to vote on this with as much education as we can afford them publicly. With that, any other questions on that discussion? Okay. So, FY Order 19044 ballot question. Town of Bridgewater Home Rule Charter changes. And we'll take a roll call vote to move that forward.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch. Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
No?
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
No.
Mr. Souza.
No.
6 in favor, 3 against.
Thank you for that. Okay, moving on to FY 19045. This is a contract ratification, as previously mentioned, for the town manager.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Motion made and approved.
Mr. President, just before, I'm just looking at, I notice the dates on that. I think it was because the first reading started at the January 26th date, but the contract itself starts today.
Motion to amend Order FY 19045 to change January 26, 2019 to February 5th, 2019.
And it ends February 5th, 2022 as written. It's a 3-year contract, exactly.
And also make that through, well, it should be February 4th, shouldn't it, Mr. Attorney?
Yeah,
It's a
it can be,
3-year.
yes, February 4th.
February 4th, 2020.
2022.
2022, yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah, 2022.
Motion made
Second.
and seconded. Any other discussion on that? So let's vote on the motion. We're going to have a roll call vote for that motion?
On the amendment.
On the amendment, sorry.
Ms. Loesch isn't here, so you gotta.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Okay, and now for ratification as amended. Mr. Fitzgibbons, did you actually originally make the...
Yes, I made the motion. I'd just like to say, thank you to the town manager and the town attorney for negotiating, and thank you for your leadership in representing the council in those negotiations, and look forward to ratifying it and keeping Mr. Dutton around for a couple of years.
Other questions or comments, rather? Any discussion? Hearing, seeing none. Roll call vote.
I'm sorry. I had one.
Mr. Columbotus.
We're extending a 3-year contract to the town manager without having done our fulfilled our duties under the charter to review his performance adequately. So while my inclination is to think that Mr. Dutton is doing a good job for our town, I wish I had a rigorous job performance review to convince, to assure me of that. So this will be the last time I'm voting to extend a contract for 3 years without doing that job review.
Thank you. Any other discussion? None? Okay, roll call vote. Please and thank you.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Motion to appoint the town manager or reappoint the town manager. Bringing back item E.
Second?
Motion made to bring back item E for the town manager reappointment. Motion made and seconded. We'll get a roll call vote to move that one.
Is this on bringing it back to the table, or is it on the appointment itself?
This is on the bring it back into order, I believe, back for, yes.
Sorry.
The first question, so that's going to,
Okay.
let's talk about it. Let's have a roll call vote to bring it back.
Okay.
Bring it back. A little business.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Motion to appoint the town manager or reappoint the town manager.
Motion to reappoint made and seconded by Mr. George. Discussion. Hearing none, let's move to a roll call vote for reappointment.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Sign each of these. No. Thank you. Moving to item M, old business. There is no old business. New business, FY 19-048, acceptance of Mass Works grant.
Motion to refer to the Budget and Finance Committees.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. That will require a roll call vote as Mrs. Loesch is remote.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Thank you. Now you'd move to item O, citizens' comments. If there's anybody left here that'd like to come up and say a couple of things. State your name and your address. Thank you.
David Hanson, 665 Pleasant Street. This is my first time up here for doing something like this, so. I guess I'll just start by saying that all of these things that are listed in the paper today regarding the changes in the town council all take the residents or the voters further from government. And I think that, and I don't know where some of these things have originated. It would be interesting to find out why they have, because I've not heard anything bad about the job that's being done as the town clerk. It's just the opposite. I'm hearing a wonderful job being done. And to say that the voters don't understand something like that would be to be a kick in the teeth, because I think the voters did a good job when they voted for every town clerk that I ever have been exposed to has been on the ball in this town, and they've all been elected, as far as I know, since the beginning of time. If this business of, I don't know a lot about the FinCom, but as far as the pay for the stipend for the for the council. I think that's like me asking the town to pay me for picking up the trash or cleaning the storm drains and all along 104 we have the farm. And I don't ask for that. And that takes up time and money for me to dump that in my dumpster to pay to have it taken away. That's an expense. Then you guys have expenses, but that comes with the territory of what you've taken on as a position as part of the town. And you guys are all elected. The other thing, I think the elections have run very smoothly, no matter what and you hear of problems of other towns having problems with the elections. They've been running very smoothly with our current town clerk, and she is very available to the people of Bridgewater. As far as the salary is concerned, I'm very much in favor of whatever they vote for her to be paid. The other thing, on the other side of this, if we go to the appointment situation, I believe that would involve a contract for the person that they appoint. Am I right? If they appoint a town clerk, it would require a contract for so many years. And suppose we don't like that person, or you guys don't like that person once they get that person into the office. And you're reading in the paper all the time now of all these other towns that have had to relieve somebody of their duty, and it's costing the town millions of dollars to go to court to fight these people that are suing the town because they were asked to leave their position after they were appointed to it. So I think that with an elected position, we avoid all of that stuff, and I think we get just as good a person as if they were appointed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Any other citizens for citizens' comments? It's a busy night. We've got another one.
Hi, Janet Hansen at 665 Pleasant Street. I'm kind of dittoing, what my husband has said. My question is, I haven't heard, why did the council feel, or whoever, feel the need to do these changes? I know you guys already voted. It sounds like it's going to be on the ballot. So I don't know what we're saying is going to change anything, but can you answer that? And then I have another comment. What was the need to bring up those changes? What happened that everybody felt that they had to change the clerk, change the stipend, in the terms? What you know what I'm saying? Is like, why did you feel the need to change the charter? What changed that you felt you needed to change the charter? Can anybody answer that? No one.
The council, the citizens' comments are open comment, not necessarily a back and forth that we'll have.
Well, that kind of like...
We're all getting the question, though. We all heard it.
Okay, it helps me understand. I don't understand. But line by line, I think the clerk should be still elected. You guys are all elected. So for you guys to, from what I hear, it would be the council that would appoint if it did. It's like you guys are, the council, sorry saying you guys. The council is elected. And then you would be appointing somebody. I think they should still be elected. And as far as the money, I agree that Mr. George, that I think you're the one who said it, that you shouldn't be appointing, running for election if you think you're going to get paid. I know it's not a lot, but that's a lot of money for a town that's struggling. And I just would like to still see some hold for the people to have some say in this government. We lost it when we have this form of government now. We lost it when we lost the selectmen. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs.
And
Hanson.
you guys do have a tough job, I agree. But that's what I have to say.
Thank you.
That's what we get paid the big bucks for.
Other citizens' comments coming up.
one last citizen to comment, or maybe there'll be more, I don't know. First and foremost, I wanted to say thank you all. I know you haven't voted on it yet, but I thank you very much for your consideration with the town clerk's salary. And I congratulate Mr. Dutton for his reappointment. And then I also wanted to say just something about the charter, because I've listened to all the discussion. My husband was on the Charter Review Committee with Ms. Loesch and with Dennis and the other people who worked so hard on it. What I worry about, I trust the voters. I really do trust the voters of this town to make good and wise decisions. I think for that purpose, they need to be informed. You can't make a good decision if you aren't an informed voter. When you get informed about a lot of those charter changes, for me, it's going to be a hard choice. I'll vote against it because it's asking for an appointed town clerk, and I don't believe that that's the best thing for the voters of this town. But there are many other things in that charter that really need to be changed, that just things that are just worded wrong and saying you should do this before you do that, and you can't practically work it out. It needs to be changed, and there's typographical errors, there's things in it that very practically need to be changed. And then there are things in it that voters need to decide on, like the town clerk issue, like whether or not some of you are going to have term limits and you're not going to be able to come back again if this is voted, like the stipends. You know, there are those kind of issues that are different than correcting the typographical errors or getting the sequencing of some process correct. And I do think it's a shame that we weren't able to pull those things out and hear what the voters actually think about those things, because you're going to lose my opinion on some things when I vote against it, because there are many things I'm for. So that's what I feel bad about. I'm sure there were other things I was going to say, but it's really getting late. So the last thing I want to say to you, but mostly to your viewing audience, which I hope there are still some hanging in there and watching it stream later on, is that papers are still available to be pulled for the 3 positions on the town council. 2 of those positions have had papers pulled for them. There's nothing wrong with a good debate and with getting information out before the citizens. We only have one candidate so far having pulled papers for the school committee, and no one for library trustee. And so I'll say this about that. I know that it's legal to run as a write-in, to come in with 10 or 15 or 20 of your friends ready to write your name in. I don't think it's particularly democratic. I think the democratic process puts candidates out there so that the voters can hear who they are, what they believe in, and that's how you decide who you're going to vote for. I'd like to see that happen. So, viewing audience, wherever the camera is, I urge you, come in and pull papers, run for some of these positions. It's important, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Citizens' comments coming to a close, it appears. And that moves us to council comments. I will go to my right with Mr. Souza.
I have nothing this evening. No comments.
Mr.
Nothing
Columbo's.
tonight, thanks.
Mr. Wood.
I will. Thank you to the Hansons for coming tonight. You know, there's long-established families in Bridgewater. Hansons are one of them. There's many, many others. And I'm sure they've seen the town change over the course of not decades, but even just years. That we've moved from a small town when I started visiting in the 60s and 70s to when I bought a house in 92. We're now seeing apartment buildings going up on the west side of town. We're talking about fire stations, that sort of thing. I'm hoping a lot of people end up supporting the charter. If it were my choice when we moved to the appointment phase and she wanted to do it, I would make the recommendation to appoint Mary Lee. She does an outstanding job. And if she wanted to retire or didn't want the job, my second choice would be Jolie. She ran that office for almost, 8-9 months after Ron died. and did an outstanding job. If she doesn't want it, then we would have to find someone else. But we would have a selection process and find the right person. You know, we can talk about this all night. I won't spend any more time on it, but I think we'd find the right person. As you know, versus one question over another, you know, cafe style. You could look at any vote that we're taking tonight that we put before the citizens, debt exclusions or other things, and say, wow, we should have a cafe vote because, you know, maybe they want front steps, maybe they don't want front steps. You know, maybe they want purple over pink. I don't know. You know, so I think the state made the decision for us, not that we didn't ask for it. They also made some other adjustments. Everybody needs to read the final version that was signed by the governor. And then we'll start educating everybody about what the changes are and why it's important to change the finance committee to a different size and why it's important to do some of the other things that the new charter talks about. And even talking about the process itself, because now that we've concluded this process, the charter itself says that we need to start again. It's been 6 years, I think. We're pretty close to that. So some point in the very near future, we're going to ask for another set of volunteers, and this is to Mr. Fitzgibbon's point, we're going to ask for another set of volunteers to step forward and start looking at the charter to make recommendations for changes. And if we say the group that did the stuff that's before us was no good, who's going to step forward and take the next action? So hopefully we do some education and work through everything. Thanks.
Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. President. A few comments. On the charter review and the charter recommendations that are going to be coming before the voters on April 28th, is I was on that committee with Councilor Loesch and others, which we started in 2014. And the current charter requires us to review the charter every 6 years, as that's a requirement. And we went back and forth on a lot of things. The previous town clerk even came into a couple of our meetings and made some passionate arguments as to why it should stay elected, and that he would fight to keep it elected if it came to a vote. And I support it going to the voters, but I probably will not be voting for it in April. Again, I think we should have had the option of separating out a couple of questions, and then next year in January or February, we start looking for another committee to review the charter again. So the charter review that we do is required by the charter, and we have to do one every 6 years. So there's that. I want to congratulate the town manager, Mr. Dutton, on his new 3-year contract. And I should be around for at least 2 of those 3 years, so I'll be here. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chase.
No comment, thank you.
Mr. George.
Just a couple things. So I think, Mrs. Hanson, thank you very much for coming to the podium. I think the other thing that I think we have to do as a council to be a little bit more transparent is explain to people that come up procedurally how things work. Because I hope you didn't take it as we don't know the answer or didn't want to answer you. But the way that this is structured on comments, we listen to people and then we have time to talk about it. And then there's more talk from there as well. You bring up some great points on that. I'm of the mindset when you're on a committee, you make recommendations for changes. That doesn't mean that everyone should support those changes if they do not feel that they're good for the town or good for the individual. As I said earlier, and I'll say it one more time, I'm thoroughly disappointed that we are basically given this as one question. There are a lot of grammatical things, I think, as Mrs. Hunt brought up, that just need to be cleared up. There are procedural things that I think the majority of the people would look at and say, this doesn't affect me, this reads better, this is what we need to do. Unfortunately, in the legislature, they came back to us and said, it's an all or nothing deal. It's just, in my opinion, another disservice that Beacon Hill has done to us. And it's getting a little tiresome that a lot of their actions are given back to us, and we're struggling to either make these happen, not make it happen, or more importantly, it just muddies the water in regards to what people think we put things out to vote And that's exactly what it's about. You support it or not support it. And I do feel bad in a way that I'm not going to support the changes for the mere fact that it's an all or nothing type of approach. We start the charter review committee up again. Maybe some of these things come back if it's voted down in a few years from now. But I guess that's part of the process as well. I'd also like to say congratulations to the town manager. Another 3 years with us. Good luck with that. And just on a side note, I was at the Patriots parade today. 1,000,005 people on a little small plot of land, which is called, Boston Common, and was just absolutely crazy. But that's it for me. Thank you.
Mrs. Loesch?
Yes. So thank you for entertaining me. Actually, it's only 8:45 in Illinois, so I am way ahead of you guys. I'm not even going to call for adjournment because I have another hour to go. But I'm happy to hear everyone's thoughts on this charter. I do encourage folks to go back and read the charter and understand how this process goes. Thank you, cameraman, for putting the camera on the phone. To really understand the process and understand how the town works. I understand that we were given the all or nothing, and the fact that we as a council don't think we can support it is the beauty of votes. But I hope all the other things in it are things that people like to see. And then to Dennis's point, we started this in 2004. It is now 2014. It's now 2009. We started again in 2020. Hopefully by 2025, we'll have an updated charter that was supposed to be done years prior. And I can tell you then I will not be on the council because we'll may or may not have term limits because we may or may not ever have this charter approved. But thank you all for your time tonight.
Thank you, Mrs. Loesch. Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Just to Mrs. Hanson directly for a second, and then a more general comment. I know I was sitting on the Rules and Procedures Committee when we got the recommendation of the Charter Review Committee that the town clerk be appointed. I trusted those folks to make the right decision that we'd asked them to do, which was why I supported it, because I wanted to do what's right for the town. If you ask me my own personal opinion out in the hallway, I'll tell you something that'll go in a whole different way, as some of my colleagues know. But this was, to me, the right thing to move forward with the town with. And with that, I want to segue into Mr. Dutton had mentioned about the school building committee having met and come up with a decision on where to go with preliminary design and schematic. And I don't know all the building terms, so I may get something wrong. And I believe the vote was 11 to 1 to 1 to go forward with the new building option that Mr. Dutton had indicated. That doesn't reflect the passion of the debate in the room, I don't think. People had a lot of questions, a lot of issues, et cetera. I want to thank Mr. Dolan's here, the vice chairman of the committee, and Mr. Chipman, who is the chairman of the committee, for running a really good set of meetings all the way through the process, allowing for many viewpoints to be heard. I think what I come through any process with this council, with the building committee, with any committee I'm on, is that I want to do the right thing for the town now, I want to do the right thing for the town tomorrow, and I want to do the right thing for the town forever. That's very important to me. And that's why I trust the voters to make these decisions, because hundreds and even sometimes thousands of people are way smarter than any of us individually, and definitely smarter than all of us collectively. And I trust them. So, I voted for the rebuild, the build a new school option, because ultimately, after hearing all the pros and cons, I thought that was the right decision to make for the town. And I'm happy to talk about it with anyone. People have my email address, happy to meet for a cup of coffee or whatever, and to tell you all about why it's the best idea. So those are my thoughts this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgibbons. I just had a couple. I wonder, for the next review committee for the charter, how this will play into it, kind of like nationally, there's a big question mark is what the next president will do or how it will impact. So the longevity and the back and forth that we've just beat this thing to a pulp with, I wonder how that will ultimately affect the next group of people that have that responsibility. Being a fan of process and hearing the word process a lot tonight in regards to, how we got here, how everything got put on that. That's a process that works. Getting it before the voters is a process that works. Nuances to the process. It would have been perhaps nice to get some items highlighted, but I heard tonight a reference that Mr. Wood made in regards to what level of detail would you offer up your itemized list of things for people to vote on individually, and that may affect adversely the said overall process. So I'm a fan of process, and I'm glad to be moving forward with that. Away from that, I spent some time today trying to get into the parade. I was at the bus station at BSU for an hour or so. It was very exciting. Way too many people. The train went right by us. So I was lucky enough to spend some time, rare midweek time in the city of Bridgewater City. Went to the Better Bean, had a nice coffee, watching everybody. Went over to Marathon Park behind the police station, had a great time. It's, the Hansons are here. Between my house that I grew up in and the Hansons' house, when I used to ride my bike as a kid, I think there were 6 houses between our houses, and I lived in the NIP, and we have really changed. We had fire station discussions today. We've got multi-level buildings across the street from my old neighborhood at the Access Apartments. And the fire truck that can get to that building is over by the river on the other side of town.
It's on McIntyre's farm.
It's on McIntyre's farm, it is. So there's so much going on, and the dynamically moving parts of our little big town, small city. We have to be sharp, folks. We have to be sharp as 9 people. We have to be sharp as participants in the town government from the voice of the constituency. Yes, you have a voice. Email me, ehaley@bridgewaterma.org. We all have email. My cell phone's available. I would love to hear from more people. I don't hear from enough people. There's, 17,000 people that vote. I'd like to hear from 1% would be great. We had a public request for emails. Hopefully I can talk about that because it's a public request. It's advertisements I've been getting from companies. Take it. I wish I had more emails. With that, good night. And
Motion to adjourn.
So let's get a
Second.
motion made and seconded. We had to do a roll call vote for adjournment.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch?
Yes.
Mr. George?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Haley?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus? Mr. Souza?
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Thank you.